So I've been running Dungeons and Dragons for 7 or 8 years now, and I started with 5th edition like a lot of people did, and in the past year or so, actually a little over a year ago, I was kind of getting tired of it, and with all the stuff that came out about the licensing agreement and everything with D&D, I decided to switch to Pathfinder. Over the past year, a little more, I've been looking into older systems, remakes of old games, things like Shadow Dark, Knave. Recently, I looked at AD&D Second Edition, several other things. I've also played other games like uh, Call of Cthulhu and what have you, smaller indie games. And I've decided there are things I like about these older systems. One of the things I really like is systems where characters roll or players roll against their character sheet instead of against a DC that I set in my head. That way, if something goes wrong, the players can't look at me and be like, why didn't you let that work? Well, you didn't hit the number. I know you don't know what the number is, which is why I'm probably this week going to just start telling my players what all the DCs are they're rolling against, because I'm getting tired of people just looking at me going, why'd you make it so hard? If I just tell them ahead of time, you can't. But having players roll against their sheet, I think, kind of puts it into the players' hands a little bit, like your character's limited in a certain way, and the DM's not the one setting the numbers. But while I was looking at these older systems, they I also like the lack of abilities that are in them. I really like Pathfinder and all of its feats that you can pick and how you can custom build a character. But there's a problem with it, and that's that you get reliant, or the players get reliant on all these abilities and skills, and they stop thinking outside of the character sheet. And that's something I tell them from time to time. It's like, you can't solve everything with what's written on your character sheet. So I'd really like to try a lot of these older rule systems or newer rule systems inspired by old rule systems, but I can't get my players to buy into them. They tell me things like there's not as many options when there's a ton of options, you just have to come up with them yourself, or they're too lethal, and the answer is yes. Yes, they very much are lethal. And I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and I really can't remember the man's channel. I'd give him credit for it if I could, but he was saying that these older systems, they tend to put the mechanics before the story, and things like 5e, and I'm guessing Pathfinder 2e, what I run now, puts the story before the mechanics. So do you have players who are in it for the story, and it just happens to be a game, or do you have a game that you also use to tell a story? For me personally, I like a game that also happens to tell a story. I love tactical games, strategy games. I like to play chess. I played a lot of StarCraft and other strategy games, so I like that. And one of the options is I could go and play war games, Warhammer, but I don't like to assemble and paint minis, and I really don't feel like shelling out hundreds and hundreds of dollars for all of that. And I really do like the social aspect of tabletop RPGs. So I'm kind of at this place where I'm like, I have these old systems I want to try. How do I get my 5e now Pathfinder players to buy into them? Oh, they'll play them for a one shot, but they go into it saying it's a one shot. What we do doesn't matter. Let's just see what happens if we die. Okay, which it's fine to take that approach, but I don't feel like we would get the full feel of my character with 6 HP has to really think through this, and hopefully we can survive it, versus, it's a one shot. If I die, it doesn't matter. We'll do something different next week. It's a different feel to it. So I'm trying to figure out how do I get a more, I don't know what the word I'm going for is, not realistic, but consequential impact to the game, where there's actions, there are consequences. It might be you lose a character and you have to make another one, and you have to kind of start thinking through things and thinking outside of what's written on the sheet. And there are consequences to the way I run Pathfinder. I mean, last week, one of the games I run, I killed a character because, well, that's just what he did. They did a thing, he got in a bad situation, and he got killed, and it just happens. But by and large, the modern takes on them with 5e and PF2, they don't have quite as much lethality, and lethality is not the point. The point is thinking it through, coming up with a good plan, a good strategy, and implementing it, and then seeing how the story unfolds, which is how I like to think about it. But my players, we have a story we want to tell, and how do we use the rules to tell the story? I'd rather use the rules to figure out the game aspect of it, play the game and watch the story emerge from it. I don't know, it's just a thing I've been thinking about because I've got a stack of books like this tall I haven't used of other games, and not that I want to switch to any of them full time, but I would like to at least get the experience, at least for me and for my players, to try and learn to think about the game in a broader sense rather than what we've been doing. So I don't know, maybe I'll come up with a way to get it to switch, or at least get to try it at some point.